Recording tonight's presentation. And we'll be starting in just about 2 minutes. So if you want to get comfortable, Bernalillo, welcome. It's so nice to have everyone here from near and far. Just a reminder to please mute your microphone so that we'll all be able to hear Rabbi Jack.
Do you know, have you ever heard him speak, Rabbi Jack Schlachter? He's so.
If everyone could please mute their microphone. Thank you. Appreciate it. South Santa Fe County. Great. Well, welcome everybody. We'll give it about 30 more seconds to let folks into the Zoom room. Well, thank you everyone for being here this evening. My name is Naomi Sandweiss Willie. I am a co-president of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, along with Linda Goff, who is here tonight as well. And we are delighted that everybody is joining us this evening because we have an outstanding speaker who will be presenting tonight. I've heard before people say that when it comes to Rabbi Jack Schlachter, they don't even concern themselves with the topic per se. They will come to hear him speak on any topic because he is presenting very rich and interesting material, regardless of topic. So, Jack Schlachter is a physicist who spent most of his career at Los Alamos National Laboratory. In parallel, Jack is an ordained rabbi. He has led congregations in New York, in Los Alamos and Santa Fe, and has also provided itinerant rabbinic support to far-flung Jewish communities, including those in Vienna, Beijing, Warsaw, Bangkok, and Guatemala City. Jack is a recovering bibliophile with a personal library comprising nearly 8,000 volumes. So, I want to welcome everybody again who is a member. And of those of you who are not yet members, I want to encourage you to become a member. And we can certainly provide information on that later. But with no further ado, welcome Rabbi Jack Schlachter.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you to the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society for providing me with this opportunity. Thank you to each of you who are devoting some of your evening tonight to a little bit of an exploration about some Jewish artists, both in the visual arts and in the musical arts. Thank you very There we go. I think you should hear me now, I think. So I wanted to thank Linda and Naomi, the co-presidents of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society. You could not ask for more supportive and helpful people to put a talk together and to deal with all of the logistics. I really have to give them a ton of credit. So anything that goes awry tonight, it's my responsibility. Anything that works, we give them credit for it. I put this talk together because I like to take pride in Jews wherever they may be found. I've done a lot about Jewish scientists, and then I thought I'd shift to the other side of the
Recording
brain
in progress.
and and look at visual and musical artists. I'm getting some feedback. I don't know what. Okay. So I had originally put this together with 18 individuals because that's the gematria for the word chai of life in Hebrew. And you'll see on the title here, I hope, that it says +2. So I added two, and you can probably figure out why I added some individuals here. You'll find out about those two individuals later on. But I wanted to then justify why I had not 18 but 20 people. And so we're going to have a minion's worth of visual artists and a minion's worth of musical artists. So we've got 10 Jews in each of the categories. Um, the title, by the way, I just want to share with you. I had originally come up with a title for a talk about visual and musical artists, and my liaison for when I first gave this talk didn't think the title was that good, so I stuck my abstract into Chat GPT. So if you don't like tunes and tints, you can blame Chat GPT. That's what it came up with for the title. Um, we don't always know who is Jewish. We may hear a musician or see an artist's work and not know if they're Jewish. And I'll just give you a wonderful example of that. It's not somebody we're going to be covering in any depth tonight, but Ellen Naomi Cohen. You can just, I don't want people to start unmuting, but Ellen Naomi Cohen is probably not a musician whose name pops into your head, obviously with some Jewish connection based on that name. But Ellen Naomi Cohen was the birth name of Mama Cass Elliot, it turns out. So we just don't always know who is Jewish, and I thought with this presentation, hopefully I will introduce you to a few names that you weren't familiar with before. I'm obligated as a rabbi to insert some Jewish text information into every talk that I give, and I wanted to share a little bit about the Ten Commandments. Here on this opening slide, you see a scene from Mel Brooks's History of the World Part 1 with the 15 Commandments, one of my favorite scenes. That got whittled down to 10 very quickly in the movie. And why is it that the Ten Commandments have any relevance to this? I'm going to start out with some Jewish text information before we turn to the 20 individuals we're going to look at tonight. And I also put on this slide about Louisiana's House Bill 71 that requires public schools to display a version of the Ten Commandments in every classroom. But currently, there is a federal judge who has blocked that law. There are similar laws in other states, but to the best of my knowledge, none of those has been implemented yet. And I personally, this is maybe my soapbox, I think there are problems with posting the Ten Commandments, particularly without commentary. So let's take a look at the Ten Commandments and what do they have to do with art and music. These are two of those commandments. This is the second commandment and the fourth commandment as found in traditional Jewish sources in the Exodus version. The Ten Commandments are found twice in the five books of Moses, in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. This is the version as they're found in the book of Exodus, and I've used the translation of what's called the New Jewish Publication Society translation. The first of those, I think you can see the connection between that and the visual arts. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image or any likeness of what is in the heavens above or on the earth below or in the waters underneath the earth. And we're going to talk about that one first. The second one you're going to have to hold in your mind until we get to the musicians. But it turns out that the remember the Sabbath day commandment has some implications about Jews in music. So, first of all, does that commandment number 2 preclude Jews from being involved in figurative and representational art. It's actually a legitimate question. We have some evidence that Jews were involved in the visual arts as early as, say, the second century, well, let's say the third century of the Common Era, because there was an excavation of a synagogue in Dura Europos in Syria, and there are some beautiful mosaics that were preserved intact. So clearly, there were some figurative arts, representational art in a synagogue setting long, long ago. However, if you look at the Talmud, you will find a passage that takes a very strict stance and prohibits the producing of images of faces in particular. And that has to do with the potential that this could be considered idol worship. So there were some workarounds. Maybe the most famous workaround was in the Middle Ages. And here's an image from a very famous Haggadah known as the Bird's Head Haggadah. And in the Bird's Head Haggadah, it has exactly what the name that we know this Haggadah by, a Middle Ages Haggadah, where all the figures have the heads of birds. And the reason for that was to skirt the prohibition on depicting human faces. Here's another image from the Bird's Head Haggadah. This one is people helping to make handmade matzah before baking. So until the late 20th century, it was actually assumed by some people that visual art could really not be particularly important to Jewish tradition because of these texts. Today, however, I would say that most scholars do not view the second commandment as prohibiting visual arts. And we're fortunate that that's the case because we have many Jewish visual artists that we should be quite proud of. I'm going to share with you now from 10 different artists. And before I do, there are far more than 10 that we could show, but I'm not going to get into particularly modern art. But Jews had a very instrumental role in modern art. And I just wanted to share this anecdote with you. This comes from Harold Rosenberg, who was a very famous Jewish art critic. And he spoke about three different modern Jewish artists, Barnett Newman, Mark Rothko, and Ad Reinhardt. We actually are going to look at Mark Rothko in a little bit of detail. But what Harold Rosenberg said was that Barnett Newman shut the door, Mark Rothko pulled down the shade, and Ad Reinhardt turned off the lights. I thought that was a wonderful explanation of modern art from an art critic's perspective. But let's back up and let's go to the Impressionist era. And I'm going to be sharing with you, again, this is 10 Jewish uh, visual artists, and I'm going to do them chronologically by birth year. So that's the sequence that we're going to have for about the next half of the talk, and then we'll shift to the musicians. Here you see Camille Pissarro, really considered to be the father of Impressionism. He is the only artist who showed in all 8 of the Paris Impressionist exhibitions, starting with the first one in 1874. And he was born in the Virgin Islands, on the island of St. Thomas, which at the time that he was born in 1830, St. Thomas was under Danish rule. And he actually, Pissarro, is of Sephardic ancestry. So not the Ashkenazic story that many of us are familiar with. Pissarro of Sephardic descent. He was born on St. Thomas, but then he was sent to study in France from the ages of 12 to 17. and then came back to St. Thomas. And then at the age of 25, he returned to France, to Paris. So he had studied basically as a teenager, and then came back to Paris and pursued pretty much the rest of his professional career in Paris. And you can see that he lived to what at least then would have been considered a ripe old age of 73 or so. He was sort of the father of Impressionism and really viewed as an elder, if you will, in the world of Impressionist art. He himself, however, because of this experience of being both Jewish and having been born outside of France, he said that he considered himself to be doubly an outsider in France. And that's actually one of the important themes about Jews in the arts, that they can often feel like outsiders, which is, of course, unfortunate. But anyway, Pizarro is the one who's kicking off our exploration about the artists, the Jewish artists. By the way, there was an exhibit at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. for quite some time, until about a year ago. And there were works from the official Salon of 1874 that were displayed in Washington. I did not make it to that, unfortunately. The next artist, maybe not quite as familiar to people, Max Liebermann. He was both an artist and a collector of art, and he was important in both of those capacities. He lived in Germany. You can see he was both born and died in Berlin. And he yet was very attached to the French Impressionist movement, and he had the largest collection of French Impressionist art of anybody. But bear in mind that this is an individual who was living through the rise of Nazism in Berlin. And I just want to share with you a couple of quotes attributed to Max Liebermann. The first was while he was watching the Nazis celebrate their victory in 1933 as they were marching through the Brandenburg Gate. He said, and this is a quote translated into English, "I could not possibly eat as much as I would like to throw up." What a powerful statement. And then later on, so he lived 4 years past that point, and one of his last visitors cited a phrase that Liebermann said. He said, "I only live out of hate. I no longer look out the window of this room. I don't want to see the new world around me." It's a very sobering comment. Now, he was mostly, to the best of my knowledge, a portraiture painter. And here you see a picture that he painted of the president, I believe, during the Weimar Republic, well, or maybe just before the Weimar era, von Hindenburg. And I have one more picture that I couldn't resist. And here you see a portrait that he painted of Albert Einstein. 1925, Einstein, already quite a famous scientist, and painted by Max Liebermann. We're going to go back to France for this individual, Modigliani, but not born in France also. So like with Pizarro, he was a bit of an outsider in France. And also you see that he was of Sephardic heritage. So again, we've got other influences here. It's this Dutch connection. As you probably know, when the Jews were booted out of Spain in 1492, many of them ended up in Holland. And so there is this connection, allegedly, with Modigliani to the Dutch Jewish philosopher Spinoza. I think that those of us who are kind of I would say non-experts in art, like me, will recognize a Modigliani painting right away because the faces are very elongated. But you may not know what he himself looked like, and I'm going to show you right there is a picture of Modigliani, almost the opposite, if you will. And I think in part what Modigliani was said to be doing was exaggerating Jewish features as might be described by people who were maybe not so supportive of Jews. Prominent noses, deep set eyes, large lips. And he himself was quite different from that in his own visage. I thought that was very interesting. Also, this always blows me away now as I am in my golden years. This is an individual who, with all his fame and all the recognition we give to his paintings, died at the age of 35. Unbelievable. Um, this individual, known to many people, Marc Chagall, um, the reason I include him is not only because he is considered to be the quintessential Jewish artist of the 20th century, but he really was very explicit about his use of Jewish themes in much of his work. Here you see one of his paintings from 1968 of the prophet Jeremiah, and he himself, Marc Chagall, had extensive involvement with biblical themes in his paintings. He escaped to the United States, and then went back to France in 1948. I'll just share with you a few pieces of information about him that I found interesting for this talk, because again, this is the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, of course, so I wanted to make sure that we emphasize some of the Jewish aspects. Chagall wrote that when he was a boy, he felt at every step that he was a Jew, and he felt that way because people made him feel that way. So he was very much cognizant of his Jewish background, not necessarily because it was so positive, but because people emphasized that in their interactions with him. He was considered great by the greatest of painters. Picasso once said that when Matisse dies, Chagall will be the only painter left who understands what color really is. Quite a powerful statement from Pablo Picasso. Um, so I wanted to go on to this individual, Sutan. I'm not sure I pronounced his name quite right. He was again emphasizing what you might consider to be Jewish self-hate, making his own features as ugly as possible in paintings, and also doing paintings of things that were not only disgusting in many ways. Here you see his painting of a carcass of beef, but also willful violation of Jewish dietary laws, because, as you probably know, blood has to be removed from meat before it can be prepared from a traditional Jewish perspective. Sutan came to Paris from Minsk. You see, this is now the Ashkenazic tradition coming from Eastern Europe. He came to Paris at the age of 20, and he was desperately poor when he showed up in Paris. He did not have his own place to stay. He did what we sometimes refer to as hot bunking. He hot bunked with Modigliani. So Modigliani would sleep in the evening and then vacate the bed, and Sutan used that same bed in the daytime in order to get some sleep. And he was struggling. He struggled to the point of despair, such that he tried to commit suicide. Sutan tried to commit suicide because it was so hard for him to make a go of it. But Modigliani, on Modigliani's deathbed, Modigliani recommended Sutan to an art dealer. and that saved Sutan's life. He was able to then be somewhat successful, and to use this art dealer to help sell some of his work. But he had a very tragic end. He refused opportunities that he had to go to the United States. He had to escape Paris after Paris was, uh, was overrun by the Nazis. And starting in 1941, he never really had a place that was a permanent place. He would go from one place to another trying to escape capture. You see that he died 2 years later, but he was sometimes forced to seek shelter in the forests and to sleep outdoors. He had a very rough time at the end of his life, and died because of these very desperate conditions that he had to experience while the Nazis were in control in France. I did think it was quite interesting that that his neighbors were very, very unhappy about this carcass of beef. You can understand why that might be the case. I guess it probably smelled terrible. And he was so committed to his art that he felt it's much more important than hygiene, and he tried to lecture them about that. Um, I want to make sure to include some artists that maybe not everybody is familiar with. I'm not exactly sure I pronounced these names correctly. Ana Tijoux. I was introduced to her because there was a family here in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where I live. Many, many years ago, when I used to teach bar and bat mitzvah students, there was a family that we're talking 40 years ago. There was a family that had spent some time in Israel, and hanging on the wall of their living room that I used to sit in once a week when I would give my bar mitzvah lessons to their son was a painting, or maybe even more than one, by Ana Tijoux. And I was unfamiliar with people actually having real art in their houses, not just reproductions like what I had grown up with and was used to, but there was an actual painting by Ana Tijoux, very important artist from the perspective of the early days of Israel. She came from Vienna to Jerusalem in 1912, as it says here, and then other than having to leave during the fall of the Ottoman Empire, she basically lived in Jerusalem the bulk of her life. Her house, the house that she lived in, is now a branch of the Israel Museum. And the subject matter of her art is largely pictures of Jerusalem and portraits of local people. So I think this is a very important dimension to Jewish art because she captured it during the formative years of Israel. I mentioned Mark Rothko earlier, and I really knew very little about him before I read a biography of Mark Rothko as part of a wonderful series that I'm going to plug here. It's published by Yale University Press. It's a series called Jewish Lives, and there are now probably about 75 volumes in that series. And as Naomi mentioned at the beginning, I am a recovering bibliophile, so I have all 75 of those volumes, many of which I have read. They're very readable biographies. They're not comprehensive biographies. Usually, the author tries to capture some dimension of the individual and explore that in some detail rather than giving a comprehensive biography. But I really got intrigued about Mark Rothko when I read that book. And so I had the opportunity to go to some museums on the East Coast and to see some of Mark Rothko's paintings. I thought they were quite interesting. Here you see one that's probably not the style you may be used to of Rothko. This is from 1944, has a lot of kind of abstract objects, but maybe a lot more three-dimensional nature than some of the things you may be used to of his more horizontal colored stripes, very abstract painting. Not a terribly happy individual either. His father was violently anti-religious. So this is in part because of anti-Semitism, and Jews being blamed for all sorts of things. His original birth name was not Mark Rothko. He shortened that. It was Marcus Rothkowitz, and he was afraid that if he shortened it to Roth, it would still sound Jewish. So instead of Rothkowitz and instead of changing it to Roth, he changed it to Rothko, a bit of trying to hide that Jewish connection. I think he was probably a difficult person to get along with. He was commissioned to do some paintings and just decided that, he was very progressive, shall we say. When he was growing up, he attended radical workers meetings of the IWW, and listened. I think he heard Emma Goldman speak. He developed some very strong oratorical skills himself, and used those skills in defense of surrealism. And so he was not terribly capitalistic, not very supportive of capitalists, and he had a commission, but he actually said that he painted some paintings that when he found out they were going to be used like in a restaurant for kind of wealthy patrons, he was quoted as saying he painted something that he hoped would ruin the appetite of every son of a bitch who ever eats in that room. Maybe not exactly what the commission was supposed to do. He told somebody that he hoped that the paintings would make the patrons feel they are trapped in a room where all the doors and windows are bricked up so that all they can do is butt their heads forever against the wall. I don't know that that's a restaurant I would want to run out to eat in if that's what he was trying to do. He had some serious health issues late in his life. He was told not to be strenuous in his art, that he should not paint pictures that were taller than 3 feet because he shouldn't be reaching up and he shouldn't be painting things that were strenuous to paint. At the same time, his marriage became quite troubled, and his marriage collapsed. He and his wife separated in 1969. He ended up moving into his art studio, and then in 1970, February 25th, 1970, he was found by his assistant lying dead in the kitchen, covered in blood. He had overdosed on barbiturates and cut his artery with a razor blade. He was 66 years old and committed suicide, sadly. I want to go on to a few more artists before we move to the musicians. Lee Krasner, a, a tremendous artist in her own right, but probably a little bit overshadowed because people always make reference to the fact that she was married to Jackson Pollock, but really an individual artist of her own making. And what I wanted to show in particular is one of the works from a series of works that she did in the 1940s. This particular one from 1948, it's very abstract. It's an untitled work, but it was thought by one of the critics to be perhaps reminiscent of early Hebrew script, early Hebrew writing. And she then told the critic, or admitted, that she painted this painting from right to left. I thought that was a fascinating detail because maybe it really was influenced by Hebrew characters. She did paint it from right to left. Um, Yossel Bergner, maybe not so well known to everybody, but Yossel Bergner was somebody whose painting I saw, some of his paintings I saw on the wall of my late father-in-law. My father-in-law spent many years in Israel. He grew up in Jerusalem, and he crossed paths with Yossel Bergner. Bergner lived most of his life in Israel as well, or in Palestine. Actually, he lived in Australia before 1948, so then he settled in Israel proper. But Bergner's paintings were gracing the walls of my father-in-law's apartment in New York, and I really decided that I enjoyed those. They're quite whimsical in my mind. You see this one of flying kitchen aids, but you also see in this next one there's some Jewish themes. That's kind of the same style, but that's a spice box. So I think Bergner clearly identified with his Jewish heritage and used that as the subject of some of his art as well. I think the next one, if I'm keeping track, is number 10. And this got added in. So now you're going to see why. And it's because this is the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society. And when I had first put this talk together, I had no connection to New Mexico, but I decided to throw in a New Mexico artist and a New Mexico musician. So when we get towards the end of the talk, you'll get the number 10 for the musicians. But this is Sarah Novenson, who some of you may know. I met her in Santa Fe at her gallery, and one of her most famous works is a series of pictures of women of the Bible. So she's very steeped in her Jewish traditions, and I am proud to say that I have one of the signed copies of that book, Women of the Bible. Here you see one of the women, Judith. Actually, it's Bible in a loose sense, I would say. Maybe not the canonical Bible, but the Jewish text tradition nonetheless. And I give Sarah a lot of credit for expressing her Judaism in her art in such a beautiful way. So we're going to shift gears now to the musicians, and I'm keeping an eye on the time. I promise that I won't let this go too long. But we're going to come back now to the Ten Commandments, and I had said that the fourth commandment, the one about Shabbat, has some connection to Jews in music, and that is that major Jewish legal codes have precluded the use of instruments on Shabbat, not because there's something really wrong with the instrument itself, but you might, for example, break a string and then be tempted to repair the string on Shabbat, and that would be a violation of traditional Shabbat laws. There's also something about imitating the Gentiles and about excessive noise making. So for this reason, as you're probably familiar, traditional synagogues have not had instruments in them. You now will find that in many synagogues, but not in very traditional settings. So tuning an instrument could also be fixing something. I mean, that's always the case with instruments, is that they get tuned. Repairing a string may be not so frequent, but that could also be a problem. By the way, this is related to the tradition that on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, if Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, if the first day of Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, the tradition is that we do not blow the shofar. So you may not be aware of that, but the tradition is not to blow the shofar on the first day of Rosh Hashanah if that happens to be Shabbat. So we're going to launch into our 10 musicians. I'm going to apologize in advance. I grabbed some YouTube videos so that you could listen to some things. We're going to do the best we can. I'll just play some snippets, but I think you will have to bear with some advertising as well, because I don't have a paid YouTube subscription. So the first of our individuals, Salomone Rossi, lived a long time ago, and in 2023, there was a celebration of the 400th anniversary of this volume that he wrote called Hashirim Asher LeShlomo, Songs of Solomon. He composed several compositions based on the Psalms, and they are not what I would call influenced by Jewish music of the time. They are instead influenced by what musicians were doing at the time, the late Italian Renaissance period and the early Baroque period. So when you listen to his music, the setting is in Hebrew, what I'm going to hope to hopefully play. The setting is in Hebrew of a psalm from the Jewish Bible, but the sound of the music is very much of Italian Renaissance and early Baroque. So let's see how we can do with this. And this is in, I believe, in Venice, in one of the synagogues in the ghetto. We're going to get a little bit of information about Rossi. As I say, he had a very important year a few years ago. So he ended up in Venice because of a plague. That's the ghetto in Venice. I could listen to that for hours. I just think that is just so gorgeous. But again, not really Jewish music by inspiration, but the text clearly is Jewish. We jump quite a long period now to basically the 20th century. Darius Milhaud. Milhaud was a very important composer who was a teacher of other famous composers. You see, Dave Brubeck and Burt Bacharach were among his favorite, most famous students. And he once told Burt Bacharach something that I am really glad he told Burt Bacharach. He said, "Don't be afraid of writing something people can remember and whistle. Don't ever feel discomfited by a melody." And thank goodness that he taught Burt Bacharach that lesson, because we have Burt Bacharach's music to comfort us and teach us. Another one of his students, by the way, was Steve Reich, who we're going to listen to a little bit later. Milhaud had to flee to the United States in 1940, and then lived elsewhere after the war, died in Geneva. This is going to be a piece. He spent time in Brazil, and his music has a very, well, some of his music has a very Brazilian feel to it. Let's see if we can do this one. I should just mention that that piece is called Le Bœuf sur le Toit, or the cow or the bull or the ox on the roof. And it's very heavily influenced by the sounds that you would hear from the Carnival in Brazil. So that influence from the Brazilian sound is in that piece in particular. Mario Castelnuovo Tedesco, and again, I'm doing these chronologically by birth year as well. Tedesco is from Italy, born in Florence, and he had to flee to the United States in 1939. Uh, I'm sorry. I know this was supposed to be an upbeat evening presentation, but there is going to be elements, I can tell you, of hardship because Jewish artists and Jewish musicians have struggled at times. In 1938, the fascist policies in Italy changed the trajectory of his life. And he said at the age of 44, when I saw my successful career in Italy cut short, the edifice I had so patiently constructed was destroyed by decree with a single stroke of the pen. And I asked myself, what's the point? I mean, you could see how people could become quite depressed. However, he fled to the United States. And he had a huge influence on the Hollywood movie scene from 1939 to 1954. He was a film composer for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. His pupils included John Williams, Andre Previn, and he also heavily influenced Henry Mancini and Nelson Riddle. And his one of the major sources of inspiration for him, certainly from texts, was Bible and Jewish liturgy. He wrote three important works for individuals. He wrote a guitar concerto for Segovia, a violin concerto for Heifetz, and a cello concerto for Piatigorsky. Hopefully, we're going to listen to at least a little bit of the guitar concerto here. I think Casanuovo Tedesco had a huge influence on the guitar and making the guitar a legitimate instrument for classical settings. This next individual, Korngold, Erich Wolfgang Korngold, quite a prodigy. He, at the age of 5, he was playing four-hand piano arrangements alongside his father. He was able to reproduce any melody that he heard on the piano, and he was playing chords and all sorts of elaborate things. By the age of 7, he was writing original music. Unbelievable. He also, I'm sorry to say, had to flee the Nazis, came to Hollywood in 1934. He actually was quoted as saying that, let's see if I can find this. Oh, I don't see it on my notes for some reason. But he said that that getting the commission for oh, is that no? But getting a commission for this Hollywood film score saved his life. And that's really true. He came to Hollywood and then he stayed in Hollywood for the duration of the Nazi era. He was he really is considered to be the one who, maybe more than anybody else, set the Hollywood music description. And I cannot resist playing something from him because it's absolutely gorgeous. So this is music that he wrote for a movie called King's Row. Now
There's a Harbor Freight store in your neighborhood, so stop by, neighbor.
Rena, Melanie, what the hell's going on?
We're here because we care about our website. I spend hours crafting pages, and when I hit update, the site crashes every single time.
there we go. Okay. This is an incredible performance. About that piece. King's Row was the title of the movie. Korngold only knew the title. He didn't know what the subject of the movie was. So he wrote that music very regal. I mean, just incredibly uplifting, powerful music. But in fact, the story of the movie was about a Midwestern town in the United States whose name was King's Row. And it's actually sort of a low life movie, not a very regal movie at all. But this music was so powerful that one of the co-stars in that movie is probably a name you've heard of. Ronald Reagan starred in that movie, and Ronald Reagan used that music on his campaign when he was campaigning for president, I believe, because it is so imperial sounding and so magisterial. But it, as I said, it comes from this movie called King's Row, which is actually not very regal at all. There's a British composer, Harold Truscott, who said that when he was 28 years old, the film came out, and he went to see the film 30 times, and several of those times he went to the movie and closed his eyes for the entire movie just so that he could concentrate on the music. It was so powerful to him. And I can understand why that would be the case. Lalo Schifrin may be a name you're familiar with. I had to update this slide because he died last year in Los Angeles. Very accomplished composer for film and TV scores. It's the TV scores that I'm mostly familiar with. And I wanted to share with you one of those because my guess is if you're of a certain vintage, you probably will recognize this. Sorry. So let me tell you a little bit about that. I'm trying to, let's see. Okay. Yeah, it's probably easier for me to go to the next one and then tell you a little bit about it so that I don't get hung up with the YouTube video. I never realized this until I put the talk together, but that very familiar theme, bum 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 bum, I didn't realize that what that is Morse code for MI, Mission Impossible. So M is two long notes and I is two short notes. And what Schifrin did was to make that the theme to express the MI of Mission Impossible using that bum, 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 bum. I thought that was very interesting. I never knew that. He also wrote the music for other popular TV shows, Mannix. He wrote the music for the Dirty Harry films, for Cool Hand Luke. So very successful and accomplished musician who only died last year. Steve Reich, still alive, maybe one of the best known of the minimalist composers, minimalism being a movement in relatively modern music, probably starting in the 60s or so. And one of the music critics said that Reich is legitimately one of the handful of living composers who can claim to have altered the direction of musical history because he had such a huge influence on the development of minimalist music. Now, Reich, I need to tell you a little bit about his upbringing. When he was 1 year old, his parents divorced. And so one parent was living on the East Coast and one parent was living on the West Coast. You see, he was born in 1936. So as a young child, he was shuttled back and forth on a train between one parent and the other. As a result, later in his life, he wrote a piece called Different Trains. He wrote that in 1988. But what he says is that he realized that when he was a Jewish child riding trains in the 1940s, he could well have been a Jewish child in Europe riding a totally different train, a one-way train. And he wrote a very powerful work for the Kronos Quartet. Called Different Trains. It's very minimalist. It uses recordings of people's voices and then in like endless loops repeating those phrases over and over again. So he recorded a person who had worked on the trains from that era talking about working on the train going from Chicago to New York. And then you'll hear that, hopefully we will hear that in this piece, Different Trains. It's a little hard to recognize, but the person is saying from Chicago to New York. At least I hope they are. While that's kind of queuing up, let me just say that Beverly and I lived in New York from 2019 until 2022, and we went to hear the Kronos Quartet perform Different Trains. It was a real thrill.
From Chicago, from Chicago, from Chicago, from Chicago to New York, from Chicago to New York.
One of the things about minimalist music is once you've listened to a little bit of it, you've probably heard the whole piece. No, it isn't quite that bad. I actually really like that piece. 1 year to observe Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day in Los Alamos, I simply had everybody come in and sit down, and we listened to different trains. And that was it. Nobody said anything. People just listened and walked out of the room. And I thought that was a very effective way to recognize Yom HaShoah. I can't resist including Bob Dylan. Somebody told me that if I didn't include him, they would never come to the talk, so I included him. Born Robert Allen Zimmerman, I'm sure that most of you know about him. He's had kind of an interesting trajectory in his connection to Judaism. There was a period where he grew up in a small, close-knit Jewish community in Duluth. He spent time in Israel, but then kind of converted to Christianity. I don't know that you can actually convert to Christianity out of Judaism. Not so easy to get out of Judaism. But then he came back and he appeared on a Chabad telethon in the 1989-1991, won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2016. President Clinton gave him an honor and said he probably had more impact on people of my generation than any other creative artist. His voice and lyrics haven't always been easy on the ear, but throughout his career, he has never aimed to please. He's disturbed the peace and discomforted the powerful, which is really what rabbis are supposed to do, right? So I would say from that point of view, he's been quite successful. He did have a pretty observant upbringing, and so there are biblical references in several of his pieces. Highway 61 Revisited echoes the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. There's a piece called All Along the Watchtower that quotes from the book of Isaiah. He quotes the priestly benediction from the book of Numbers in something called Forever Young. So he clearly has some Jewish influences. And in the interest of time, because I think people all know his stuff, we're going to just skip past his music. I want to finish up with the last few individuals here. Debbie Friedman, probably familiar to many of you if you ever set foot in a somewhat modern synagogue, had an enormous influence on contemporary synagogue Jewish life. One cantor said of her, she was the first, and every contemporary chazan, song leader, and layperson who values these concepts is in her debt. And I think that's true. Even Blue Greenberg, the Orthodox Jewish feminist, said that Debbie Friedman had a large impact in modern Orthodox shuls. She was a religious bard and an angel for the entire community. So you're probably familiar with some of her songs, the Aleph Bet song, Miriam's song, Not by Might, I Am a Lotke. That one I'm not so familiar with. But let's see if we can do a little bit of her singing Misha Berach, which is something that many of us know as a prayer of healing used in synagogue.
There's a Harbor Freight store in your neighborhood. And the thing about neighborhoods,
it would be really hard for me to, especially in these times, to be with so many people and to not sing the Misha Berach with you. So I'm just going to do it. And I'll sing it first for you and ask you not to sing along. And then I'll ask you to join with me and to hold in your minds and hearts the names of those people in your lives in need of healing. And for all of those across the seas, all of those we don't know, and all of those for whom there is no one to ask for blessings of healing and well-being. This is for you. Mekor habracha ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say amen. This is still for you.
Here is my New Mexico ringer. I could not resist because of the annual meeting of the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society. I wanted to include a New Mexico musician, and who better to include than Jordan Wax? Those of you who attended the meeting in Albuquerque got to hear him, and if you've not heard him talk about the newest holiday on the Jewish calendar, Chag Dag, the fish holiday, you have missed something. So I just want to give him a little bit of a shout out here. So we are really fortunate to have him. I didn't know when he was born, so I tried to do these chronologically, and I apologize, Jordan, if I put you out of sequence, but we're going to end. Our last musician is actually number 10 now, and this is Pink, who I knew precisely nothing about before putting this presentation together, but Pink has described herself as an Irish, German, Lithuanian Jew. Her mother is Jewish, and halakhically, she is clearly Jewish, and she doesn't hide that fact at all. And I really enjoyed learning about her and getting to listen to a little of her music. She was named Woman of the Year in 2013 by Billboard magazine, and quite an accomplished performer, show person, and really comes across as a very warm individual. So we're going to close by listening to a little bit of Pink, because I'm guessing that some of you also may not know her stuff. So let's just see if we can do this. We probably are going to have to skip over. Oh, no, there we go.
Haven't always been this way. I wasn't born a renegade. I felt alone, still feel afraid. I stumble through it anyway. I wish someone would have told me that this life is ours to choose. No one's handing you the keys or a book with all the rules. The little that I know I'll tell you. When they dress you up in lies and you're left naked with the truth, you throw your head back and you spin in the wind. Let the walls crack, 'cause it lets the light in. Let them drag you through hell. They can't tell you to change who you are. That's all I know so far.
So I don't think you can claim that isn't influenced by David and Goliath. And I encourage you to explore any one of these 20 individuals that we covered this evening. And also, if I ever have the opportunity to give this talk again, I'm open to your suggestions for people that you think I ought to include in a subsequent version of the talk. There's my email address and my website there. And thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you learned something tonight. And I hope in the end it was uplifting at a time where we could use a little bit of uplifting. So I'll just leave that on for another few seconds so that you can capture physicsrabbi@gmail.com. Same with the website. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Jack. On behalf of all of us, thank you for sharing and taking us through centuries of Jewish art and music and in an hour, which is amazing. I want to invite any questions that folks might have in the chat, or if you wish to unmute, you can do that as well. I know we don't have all the time in the world, but if there's a burning question for Rabbi Jack, please let us know. I see Stu, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quickie comment. My daughter went to school with Alicia Moore in high school. So we've heard a lot about Pink.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. You probably even knew that instead of P-I-N-K, it's P exclamation point N-K.
There's nice accolades in the chat. Are there any other questions or comments? Please let me know if next time, please add Leonard Bernstein.
Yeah.
That's another biography in the Jewish Lives series, by the way, well worth reading.
That was a suggestion.
Gershwin.
Anybody else? Well, again, thank you so very much for giving us this lovely break from everything else going on in the world. And we definitely appreciate all of your knowledge and sharing it with us. So thank you.
And my pleasure. And also thank you again to Linda and Naomi for making this so seamless on my part. Much appreciated.
And we'll share your suggestions of Neil Diamond and Gershwin, folks, with Rabbi Jack. So
thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.